Okay, so let's see what we are going to talk about right this minute. Digital audio connections. So connections, like, how many connections you got?
We get this question from time to time, but it does make sense to have a little chat about the different ways to connect digital into your DAC or whatever you're driving. So typically you have a computer, you have a transport, a CD player or something like that, and it puts out digital audio. And you want to get this into your DAC so you could actually hear the analog that goes into your amplifier or whatever. And there's a few different ways you could transmit that digital audio. The common ones are optical audio. You have USB, in addition to AES-EBU balanced digital and coax. And so there's kind of pros and cons to each of them. It really depends on what you're doing, your application.
And so given all these damn connections that people have to learn, and we had to learn it too back in the day. I remember when digital audio first came about, we were still analog, right? We were running RCA interconnect, and then people had to learn how to connect all this stuff. This was pre-USB, even with video was a similar thing where you had all these different connections. So, but with digital audio, some of these connections are actually better in terms of sound quality than others. I mean, some will argue that it's all the same, digital is digital, but that isn't really, in theory, it sounds wonderful, but in practice, it doesn't really work out that way. So, like, my experience has been that optical, even though it's nice because it electrically isolates components, which is probably great if you're connecting up to like a cable TV box or something common, it tends to have the worst sound quality in my experience. And AES-EBU did balance is pretty much was typically reserved more for pro use, but it's limited in bandwidth, so that's not a very popular format anymore. You see it a lot in the higher end audio guys using it on the older DACs, but nowadays pretty much everything is shifted to USB. SPDIF is an excellent connection. If you only have an RCA digital input, from my understanding of it, it's very low jitter. It's a good way to connect digital. So if there's a source that's got SPDIF, digital out, which usually is an RCA connector. I think sometimes you see BNCs, but that's a good format to use. And of course, USB is pretty damn universal as far as I understand. So USB and RCA are probably the best formats to use in higher end audio. They'll all work.
Yeah. Today, especially.
Have you played with the different ones? Have you played with the different?
I pretty much just use USB because it's easy.
Yeah, all right, it's there.
I mean, it just comes down to that's what everything pretty much has, and it's easy. So
yeah. I used to use an old processor on the setup in the great room for surround sound and stuff, and it didn't have USB, so I basically was always running SPDIF into it from sources. But now, I don't even think cable boxes have RCA outs. You can't even get I don't think you can connect audio to a cable box at all anymore.
Yeah.
It just gives you HDMI.
A lot of people are moving away from cable boxes at all now because most smart TVs have the functionality built in. So that's a dying breed as is.
Yeah. And then you run into another issue. Like, I'm having a hard time now that I'm running just the TV in my sound room here. I'm staring at the big TV. It's difficult. It's all HDMI. It has an optical out. It has headphone out, which I'm connected to now. But, it's tough even to get out of a TV. Not tough, but it's difficult to get. You can't get I'm trying to get HDMI out of this TV, right? Even on the ARC channel, which now there's eARC, and which is actually supposedly is able to do all the Dolby and the DTS stuff, which the original ARC reverse channel audio wasn't capable of. It didn't have the res. And so now these eARCs just coming out, but almost none of the receivers have it. Mm-hmm. So you're limited in that. And you got to have a receiver to decode it, which is crazy. I can't get high res. I can get analog out of my headphone jack on this big TV, right? Top shelf TV, Sony. I got to plug into the headphone jack and run interconnects over here to the system.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of how it is now, though. It's not really which one's best; it's which one you can actually even use. And HDMI is a good example of that, where, you're tied down to using HDMI things. There's no way to separate the audio.
For the most part, you really don't have much choice in it. Most modern things in the headphone space, especially, it's USB only for the most part. If they have another digital input, it's going to be just a standard coax input. And between those two, it really depends on what you're plugging it into. There's very little advantages to either or. Maybe if you have an exceptionally long connection, you might run into some trouble with coax, and USB would be a better option, but there's limitations there as well. And optical should be great for very long connections, but the way it's implemented in most consumer gear, it's not really designed to transmit very far. And for whatever reason, it's been dying anyway. So it doesn't seem to be a very good choice in modern times.
I think optical, you can go, I mean, you can't go 100 feet, I don't think, but you can go pretty, the normal so many meters on an optical cable wouldn't be a problem, I think, for a consumer level device.
Well,
I think.
Actually,
I've never tried that.
There's actually a combination of both now. Corning makes an optical USB cable that goes hundreds of feet that you can get now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but it's got electronics and it's amplified,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
it's a real send receive optical system that
Yeah.
It's active.
it's
yeah.
made to
Yeah.
do that.
Well, the difference is the Corning optics, those are designed with the transmit receiver on each end,
Yeah.
intended for that duration, that length, which your Toshlink connections are made for short stuff. And
Yeah, I mean
that's-
the PCBs and that the little Toslink adapters that are in the consumer gear, it's like a 50-cent PC board. It's a really cheap optical transmitter receiver. It's not designed to go. It's not designed to be anywhere high end. It's just designed to kind of work, in the typical rack situation. Yeah.
It's kind of strange that optical really got standardized at all in the consumer space, because there really wasn't many advantages for it in its day. I guess the appeal was mainly it was cool, like it was interesting. It was, it is optical, but it doesn't really seem to provide much advantages today, especially.
Well, the
It's-
consumers.
Yeah, the transmissions distances are very limited in the consumer gear. And typically they don't use very good transmitter receivers. Typically they use plastic optics. They're not really made for considerable durations. The only advantage is you isolate the grounds from the gear. And that seems to have limited benefit as well until you move it into where you're trying to distribute the particular digital audio into a bunch of devices. Then I could see some advantages there. So maybe if you have dozens of devices, then absolutely optical is probably the way to go to avoid issues. But for the most part, when you're talking about one device, USB or SPDIF, tends to be the preferred method for the most part.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I'm going to play with optical because I'm going to try running out of the TV. I need 8 meters.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have, JPS has the longest we make is 2 meter optical cables. So I bought these couplers from Amazon. You could put optical to optical. They're sloppy, right? But I'm going to try putting 4 2 meter cables together, running the TV over to the Saga dock over here and just see what the hell the difference is like, running headphone out of the TV versus that. I guess the difference, like coming out of a television, a flat screen, is that I don't know what the TV is actually decoding out of the headphone out. Like I don't think you get like full DTS encoding, right? Or whatever.
Depends
You
what
don't.
you're watching. Well, I think the biggest thing, like with USB and everything, isn't the format itself. It's what you're usually connecting to it with is a computer, which is not a great source usually. Ideally, use not a computer, because they are noisy. Like every time I
Yeah,
change,
they are quite noisy.
I've ran a Sony server USB out of that into the DAC, and it's way better than my computer as a source. But I can't stream anything on that, so limited to what music's on it.
Well, streamers now are pretty good too. From
Yeah.
what I hear, they come in all kinds of flavors, but they are really good. Hell, I just had a customer call me today, and he was talking about that. He says he's never used a streamer. Now he's tried it, and he says it's finally, he went from MP3 suck to this is pretty good. It's acceptable on a higher end system, which is true. If you listen to some of the newer streamers, we're talking $5,000-$6,000 and up streamers.
Yeah.
You could probably get something for less that's okay or still pretty good. But the Auralic, is it Auralic? I think makes that stuff. They go up to $20,000 with their stuff, I think. But
There's
yeah,
quite a few
they're
players in that space now.
yeah, they're nice. So, I mean, they're made just for that. And you think about it, it's kind of like a car radio type thing too, where you choose the different formats on a car radio, like SAT or whatever. And most of the modern stuff today has built-in EQ settings, I think, for each of the format. They've already kind of pre-tailored the sound, so to speak, because They understand the limitations of, you know, an FM radio versus SAT versus a direct connection or Bluetooth to your phone. And I think they give each one the more modern car stereos seem to give more of an appropriate amount of resolution to each one. The thing is that with our electronics here, we're using high-end audio or 2-channel DACs and so on for headphones. You know, they don't have that EQ built in. They're going to play whatever you're playing. So bottom line is the connector format can matter in terms of the sound quality you get out of it. And like I said, I think in our experience, we found that usually SPDIF or USB is probably in your best case. And if you have USB, you're almost always best to use that because it's probably going to do things and help you out in ways that you don't even want to know. You know, if the unit has USB, it's probably the way it's going to want to connect. Don't bother trying to dumb that down. It's probably not going to get better.
It would depend on implementation on anything, though. So it kind of, you know, depends on the unit, really.
Depends on the source.
Well, yeah. So it's a variable, obviously.
Well, you brought up computers. You know, they are noisy for sure. Some more than others.
Well, yeah. Again.
You know.
Yeah, but how does it help you if you're driving it from a computer? You can't like pick your output of digital audio for the computer.
That's the
you
problem.
have USB, right?
Yeah.
Some of them do have coax output,
Yeah.
but I'm not convinced that's really going to be any better than USB.
Yeah.
No.
USB is probably better.
Well, if you're really interested about sound quality, you probably got to optimize, either not use a computer and go to a streamer server, you know, which, I mean, they're made for that. They're dedicated
They're
units
basically
made to
computers. It's just made
sound
for
good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're not running, but I don't think they're running like, you know, they're not running iOS or, you know, Windows. I think the better ones are proprietary. They're firmware.
Usually probably Linux or Unix based, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
more often than not, it's running a full operating system.
Yeah. Designed around doing just that.
Right.
Which is part of the problem with a computer. I mean, and two, there is software you could buy for computers that do shut non-essential processes off to drop the noise down. But in either case, you're almost always dealing with a noise issue. IFI makes like a filter, I think, that plugs into the USB, and it's made.
Yeah.
It's probably a low pass. It's made to wipe out the noise. A lot of people say it works great. I don't think it's expensive. It's a tweak. I don't usually like plugging in all this crap because there's too many variables. You start running bad connections and more cables, and before you know it, it's a more hotter of a mess than you started with. But some people said that works pretty good, and I think it's under $100 or something like that. It's like a filter, and I've seen some other companies do that too. So there are some workarounds that companies in audio have made that they realize the issue with noise, and they're trying to bandwidth limit the cable so that it lets the audio through and stops the RF noise from the computer and so on, which adds that grunge to sound, you know. So that is the caveat of USB. It's doing a lot of crap on one cable, and invariably you're gonna pay for that somewhere, you know. So you know, it just depends on the source, like you said, Eric. It really depends on or Jason, you said the implementation. It depends on the implementation. It depends on the source.
But generally USB or SPDIF coax are probably the way to go in any modern equipment. That would be our recommendation anyways.
So anywho, probably wrapping this one up time. Thanks everyone for watching, and please subscribe to us. We're still trying to get to that 1,000 point. We're going to run over our headphone, and take care of yourselves. Thanks.